Welcome back to Cancer Buzz. I'm your host, Summer Johnson. Clinical trials are essential for advancing and delivering the most effective cancer treatments, but ensuring those trials reflect the full diversity of the patients they aim to serve remains a challenge. Today, we explore how one community cancer program in Louisiana built a clinical research infrastructure designed to reach more people across the state and successfully increased equitable participation in trials.
We saw an area of need where a lot of cancer patients were required basically to leave the state in a lot of instances in order to pursue clinical trial opportunities.
The program was designed to mimic a large academic center in a community-based setting with an eye toward bringing novel treatment opportunities to patients who would not otherwise have them. When we spoke with Dr. Victor Lin, the research medical director at Mary Bird Perkins, he explained how his cancer center is working to make sure that the patients they enroll in trials accurately reflect the communities they serve.
Certainly in the Deep South, there's a lot of unfortunate history that has gone before, which has really put us, behind the eight ball in terms of having to rebuild the trust with some of these underserved communities and making sure that they understand that their rights are protected and that, when we approach patients about clinical trials, that their best interests are, first and foremost. Our approach has been multifold. I think one really important thing that we tend to emphasize is that we try to engage, underrepresented populations on a regular basis. Our philosophy is that if a patient is hearing about the clinical trial for the first time, when they need it, it's probably too late. And so, we really want to be banging the drum in the community to say, hey, if your family or loved one, ends up, with an unfortunate diagnosis of cancer, just keep in mind that these clinical trials are out there and not every center has the same trials. And it's always an important step to ask your physician about whether or not a trial is available that would be right for that patient. And I think that goes a long way to trying to, build the rapport because, again, if you're approaching a patient and the first time they're hearing about clinical research is when you're offering them the trial, they're going to approach that with a certain amount of mistrust, I think. I think another thing that, we really focus on is, my philosophy when it comes to selecting trials to open. And as you know, there's a ton of trials out there in all kinds of spaces. Some of them are redundant. Some of them have been open for a while and aren't as promising as they once were. My philosophy, when I look at any trial is I ask the question, if I was this patient or if my loved one was this patient, would I feel comfortable enrolling on this trial? And if the answer is no, then I don't open the trial. And I think, having that bar, really does help to make everybody comfortable that, when you look at the portfolio that we have, that there's really no black holes in there where, we're just doing it for the sake of doing a trial.
I wanted to ask you about the Wallace Project. Can you tell me how that initiative fits into your broader strategy?
As part of our funding through the Gilead Foundation, we'll be working with an entity called the Wallace Project, which is going to help us put up a large mural in North Baton Rouge, which is one of the minority majority communities in our area, which is going to kind of be, I would think of it as kind of a beacon to help people start the conversation about clinical trials and help people get that question on their mind so that they're asking their doctors about it. And when we go into the community, so, we have regular outreach events, including one of our programs, our flagship programs is called Prevention on the Go, or POGO, where we do cancer screenings in communities that have poor access to healthcare all throughout the state of Louisiana and even into the Mississippi Delta region. And, I think having something like that, that's a physical presence, is going to help people remember when we have these types of events to engage and to ask. And again, with our new community clinical trials navigator, TJ, I think that's going to be really important in getting people comfortable with the idea of clinical trials and really sparking participation.
A big part of this conversation is earning back the trust from communities that have historically been underserved and harmed by the medical system. So I wanted to talk more about that with Dr. Lin and get to know what his team has learned about addressing those in a culturally responsive way. He mentioned that on top of eligibility criteria being a limiting factor, where you live has a huge impact.
Big thing that we keep coming back to, particularly in our area, because our catchment area is so large, is that the requirement of centralization of trial activities can be a barrier. So, if I have a patient who is traveling 4 hours to see me, to participate in a clinical trial, and that trial is randomized against standard of care. And if they get randomized to standard of care, it's going to be awfully hard to tell that patient, hey, you could have stayed at home to get the standard of care, but because you decided to participate in this trial, now you have to travel 4 hours each time you want the standard of care treatment. I think there are pretty obvious trial design things that both the sponsors and regulators could be a little bit more flexible about. And I would say that this is something that we had to do during COVID. During COVID, a lot of patients couldn't travel, to see their trial sites, and we had to be creative, keeping people on schedule, and that did involve a lot of remote labs and remote, televisits and things like that. So we know we can do this. And so I think we can take some of those lessons and apply that and make it easier to access these clinical trials for people who have logistical hurdles, especially, you think about having to take time off work, you think about travel money, you think about maybe lodging somebody. A lot of the approach to this point has been, well, if we just throw money at the problem, if I give the patient a gas card and I pay for their hotel, that's sufficient. We have to be thinking about more broad things like, hey, this person, if they take that much time off work, they might be losing their job, right? And so we really, really have to be thinking from a trial design standpoint about the barriers that we're throwing up in the name of trying to keep the science and the data clean. And I think there is probably a happy medium somewhere there where, hey, for a standard CMP or a CBC, like maybe we don't need that to be done specifically at the trial site. Or, if this person is getting a standard of care therapy that is available anywhere as part of the control arm, we can do that locally and not, with specifically the PI of the study. I think these are all things that we've seen in our day-to-day.
Earlier in the show, you heard Dr. Lin mention TJ. He was referring to TJ Lawrence, a registered nurse and patient navigator at Mary Bird Perkins Cancer Center in the clinical research department. She works closely with Dr. Lin to build relationships with patients and encourage interest in clinical trials.
I'd say every day is different. But at the heart of it, my job is really about connection. I spend time in the clinic lobby and treatment areas. I speak with patients and their families, just being present and accessible. I try to meet people where they are, whether that means answering questions one-on-one. Sometimes I've joined patients during their appointments or even followed up afterwards, if after I know they've had a visit with a friendly phone call, just after they've had time to process information to see if they have any questions. I also spend a great deal of time attending community events, health fairs, and screenings. That's what I absolutely love the most. I love engaging with the community. When it comes to clinical trials, I try to focus on education first, what they are, like what clinical trials are, how they work, and why they matter. I work very closely with our research team here. We have a bunch of coordinators and research nurses as well to try to help identify patients that may be a good fit for a trial. And if those patients have any reservations or questions, then I'm always available to explain to them in just plain English. And sometimes it's just about planting a seed where, an idea may be introduced about a clinical trial, and they may come back like later, ready to learn more. At the end of the day, I try to respect our patient's pace, but I do stay consistent and available.
From her conversation with patients, TJ knows that one of the biggest concerns for patients is that they'll be treated like guinea pigs or being taken advantage of. So a big part of what she does is education. And she said her goal is that her patients feel heard and she can address their questions and concerns. She also said her goal isn't to get more people signed up for clinical trials, but instead she wants to educate patients on the options available to them. I asked TJ if she had any recent moments that made her feel like this is working.
Yes, there definitely is one. I think that the primary challenge really is building trust, particularly within marginalized communities that have experienced that historical trauma related to medical research. And to give you an example, I was recently contacted by a patient within the community. Her sister attended a community wellness event that I was at conducting educational sessions on clinical research. And she shared that she had been diagnosed with breast cancer and was given a prognosis of 9 months to live by her current physician. She let me know that she had an upcoming appointment with one of our doctors here at Mary Bird Perkins. And she mentioned that her sister was at that event that I was speaking at and told her about me, gave her my contact information. And so she called me and she was, ready. She requested, she wanted me to sign her up immediately for a clinical trial. So, of course, that did require a bit of education where I had to explain that the process involves more than just the sign me up. And I explained to her that we carefully screen each patient to determine eligibility for specific trials. I collected her information and facilitated the assessment and screening of her patient profile. Now, unfortunately, she was not a match for any of the trials that we currently have available. However, I still believe that the work that we are doing is impactful as it planted a seed through her sister that was shared with her. Um, in that situation, I thought, because I feel like trust is one of the biggest challenges that we had, I made it a point to show up before her appointment. I went and found her and met her in our lobby, visited with her about 10-15 minutes before her appointment, just to encourage her. And she told me that that meant a lot to her, that, and for me, I'm like, it's not just about enrollment, it's about building the relationships and establishing respect and building rapport within the community.
TJ shared why it's so important for patients from the community you work with to see themselves reflected in clinical trials and on the staff who are supporting those trials.
I think that representation builds trust. If people don't see themselves in this process, whether it's in the data, whether it's in the staff or any of the outreach programs that we have, they're just less likely to believe that this is for them. In my community, Black and Brown communities especially, I think there's a deep need to feel seen, respected, and understood. When a patient sees someone that looks like them or shares their background talking about clinical trials, I think that that shifts the energy. It's not just clinical research. This is our health. This is our outcomes. I always tell patients, and whenever I'm in the community, any of the attendees that are at these events, I'm like, clinical trials are how we shape the future of healthcare. And we simply put, we need diversity in trials because cancer doesn't affect everyone the same way. If the research does not reflect all of us, the solutions won't either.
Dr. Lynn and TJ work closely together, so we're ending the show by asking both of them about the importance of a community-based program like the one they've built.
I never expected it to go from the academic center to the community center, but it's funny that it worked that way. And we have another example of a patient who went to seek care at another academic cancer center that was told she really didn't have any options. And she came to see us for a second opinion, and we had a clinical trial for her. She came to us on hospice, 3 liters of oxygen in a wheelchair, and we took a look at her and decided she was an appropriate candidate for a clinical trial. And within a month, she was out of the wheelchair and off oxygen and asking me if she could go party on Bourbon Street, and there's been this long-standing perception that cancer clinical trials are really the domain of only academic cancer centers. But I think increasingly we're finding that not all, but some community cancer centers can be more nimble and are perfectly capable of running the same trials and seeing these patients where they live. And I think there's a recognition that maybe they might take a little bit more development to get those community centers to the place where they're functioning at that level. But I think if you do that investment, you can really make a tremendous difference.
I would just like to say I agree with everything that Dr. Lynn said. One of the things that I always like to harp on when it comes to clinical research is the importance of like the groundbreaking medical innovations that we cherish today, and I feel like sometimes can even get taken for granted, like basic things like insulin, vaccines. None of this would exist without clinical research. So we need people. I always want to drive home that we need people to say, yes, I will contribute to the solution. We've had trailblazers that have like forged a path for us, and now I feel like it's our responsibility to step into that light. And by joining a clinical trial, you're not merely aiding yourself, you're extending a lifeline to your community, to your children and future generations. So you're ensuring when you agree to join a clinical trial, you're ensuring that when the next monumental medical breakthrough occurs, that it encompasses each and every single one of us.
For more on bringing cancer research into the community, be sure to check out the show notes. Until next time, for the Cancer Buzz team, this is Summer Johnson.
This show is a resource of the Association of Cancer Care Centers.